Assalamualaikum, and hello YouTubers. Pro 2 is here. In this video, I will share with you guys on how to restore and rebuild the suspension system on your car. Almost every bushing on the front wheel is going to be replaced. The reason why we are doing this is because all these components are worn out and they have to be replaced. Once the bushings start to wear, it results in metal-to-metal contact, causing greater damage to these metal parts. Not only is this a relatively inexpensive repair, but replacing them will help ensure that your vehicle is safe to drive. Additionally, if you ignore the damage, there is a chance that it will get worse and lead to further damage. Remember, it's best to get the problem solved as early as possible, in order to avoid more serious conflicts in the future. To give you an idea of what we'll be doing, here are the old components that I have removed and will be replaced with the new ones. Generally, everything from the wheel inwards is gonna get replaced. Here are all the new components that will be installed on this car. We will be replacing the lower arm, the strut insulator, also known as the absorber mounting, inner tie rod, and outer tie rod end, along with a new boot cover to protect them. A pair of rubber bush for steering rack. A set of cross-member bushings and a set of front stabilizer bushings. I will also replace the suspension for this car with a new one. This is coilover suspension, a type of suspension that allows you to adjust a car's ride height. Some people call it a high-low body shift adjustable absorber. While coilovers are better known for their height adjusting capabilities, but people usually think they make the ride less comfortable. However, if you install the coilovers properly, you'll actually get better handling. So, we're ready to get started and install our new suspension. Before you jack the vehicle up, block off the rear tire so the car doesn't roll. And also pull the emergency brake, which will prevent the car from rolling. Use the hydraulic floor jack for the safest way to lift your vehicle. Slide the floor jack underneath your vehicle, right where your jacking points. Once the car is jacked up, you can get your jack stands and place it under the car. Then, you're going to slowly lower the car down into the jack stands. Before you begin working under the car, wiggle the vehicle left and right to ensure it is stable and secure on the jack stands. Wiggling the vehicle also tells you whether you have the wheels blocked properly. Once you've done that, unscrew the lug nuts that hold the tire in place and take the tire off. For extra safety, place the tire under your vehicles. As bolt and nut most likely be covered in rust under here, I will put some lubricant on them to try and help release them. You might find it best to leave them to soak for 10 to 15 minutes before starting. After 15 minutes, start by removing the upper bolt 17mm from the drop link. Take a car jack, and jack up the knuckle to get the drop link aligned with the arb hole. Push the drop link away from the absorber. Remove one more bolt 14mm, located below it. And then remove the drop link. Cut the cable tie to release the brake hose from the absorber. Next, we will remove the tie rod end. Use a 17mm socket to loosen the nut above it. To remove the tie rod end, you can use a ball joint separator. Slide the fork of the separator between the ball joint and the part you want to separate it from, and position the top of the jaw at the center of the tip. Sometimes the tie rod end can get stuck to the knuckle. This special tool can help make it easier to separate them. This is usually a bad inner tie rod look like. I can easily move it in different directions just by using my hand. You can't move an inner tie rod this much when it is still in good condition. Next, we are going to take out the shock absorber. First, we need to loosen the two bolts. One at the top and one at the bottom. Use a hammer to push them out from the clevis shock. Remove the upper bolt, then insert a screwdriver into the hole. This will hold the shock absorber in place for the moment. Then remove the lower screw bolt. Loosen and remove the top shock absorber nut. 14 millimeters. Remove the screwdriver. Pull outward the knuckle, and you can take the shock absorber completely off the car. This shock is having issues with oil leaking out. You can see that the shock looks wet and oily. Before we continue, I would hang my knuckles from the vehicle with a wire. Lift the knuckle using a scissor jack and insert the wire to hang the knuckle. This prevents the knuckle from putting pressure on the brake hose or the drive shaft. Next, we are going to take out the lower arm. We need to turn the knuckle outward to create some room. Then, we will loosen the 19mm nut on the ball joint. Only loosen the nut, do not remove it from the ball joint. The nut protects the end of the thread when using the ball joint separator. Slide the fork of the separator between the ball joint and the knuckle. Using a 14mm socket, tighten the bolt of the ball joint separator until the ball joint breaks free. Or, you can use a hammer to hit the joint, which will make the ball joint come loose. Now with the ball joint broken loose, continue removing the 19mm nut. And remove the knuckle assembly from the lower arm. It's obvious that the dust cover of the lower arm is broken. Moisture and dirt will enter the joint, resulting in premature air. Clearly, when I push the ball joint with my hand, it can move easily. Next, remove the lower arm support bracket by unscrewing the two screw bolts. 17mm. Remove the last screw bolt from the front bushing. Use a 17mm ratchet to hold one end of the screw bolt, and then unscrew the 17mm nut on the other side. Remove the screw bolts from the assembly, and the lower arm can be removed completely from the vehicle. The next item to be removed is the inner and outer tie rod's end. There should be a locking nut, sitting tight against the tie rod end. Use a properly sized ratchet to loosen the locking nut. Mine was 19mm. The outer tie rod end must be twisted off from the inner tie rod. Remember to count exactly how many turns it takes, so that you can tighten the replacement the same number of turns. This helps keep your alignment as close as possible. However, you will need to have an alignment done after replacing the inner and outer tie rod's end. Next, take a cutter and cut the cable tie from the boot on the inside end of the inner tie rod. There is another one at the very end of the boot that you need to remove. Now, you can slide the boot off. Once you remove the boot, you will be able to see the ball joint of the inner tie rod where it is screwed into the rack. To remove the inner tie rod, you will need a special tool. This is an inner tie rod removal tool. How to use it? You can just slide over the end of the inner tie rod. The head was designed to auto-grip the end of the inner tie rod when it meets a flat surface on the inner tie rod. Then, put a long extension on there with a breaker bar. Twist it anti-clockwise, and it comes right off. But it seems the inner tie rods are smaller in diameter and the tool won't grip the tie rod very well. So, I made a few adjustments to it. Using my old timing belt, I cut 2 small pieces and placed them on opposite sides of the tool. Then, I use some cable ties to secure them. Alright. Let's see how well these work. Begin by sliding the tool over the end of the inner tie rod. Give it a push left and right a couple of times. That will make sure it's firmly gripped around the end of the inner tie rod. Once that is secure, attach a long extension to the socket drive. I used 3 long extensions in a row, so I could have enough room outside the wheel well area. At the end of the extension, I used a long pipe to break the inner tie rod loose. Then, twist the inner tie rod end counterclockwise to loosen it from the rack. Once it is loose, you can take the rest off by hand. The next part that needs to be removed is the cross member. Loosen the 2 nuts that are 14 mm in size located at the bottom of the front and rear cross member. Just remove the nut without taking out the screw bolt from the engine mounting. This will hold the cross member in its place temporarily. Remove the screw bolt that is holding the cross member in place. There are 2 screw bolts, 17 mm in the front, and 2 more in the back. Take out the engine mounting screw bolt at the back. And remove the screw bolt from the front. While supporting the cross member with hand, slowly bring it down. The next item to be removed is the steering rack bushing. Before removing the steering rack clamp, we need to take out this bracket first. Moving this bracket allows us to make space for loosening the steering rack clamp. Loosen the 17 mm screw bolt on the bottom of the bracket. And loosen the top screw bolt. Then, remove the bracket. And then, you can remove the 2 screw bolts, which are 17 mm in size, that hold the bushing to the steering rack. Then, remove the bracket. Move the steering rack forward to create some room. and then you can take out the worn-out bushings. Repeat the same steps on the other side of the steering rack. Alright. The two steering rack bushes have been removed. The next part that will be removed is the stabilizer bar bush. To remove the bush, we need to lower the subframe so there is enough space to take out the bush. You need to unscrew the two 17mm screw bolts in order to lower the subframe. This is where the stabilizer bar bush is located. Remove one more screw bolt from the driver's side. This will make enough space for us to remove the stabilizer bar bushing. Then remove the 12mm screw bolt from the bracket. Remove the bracket. Once the bracket is out, we can easily take out the bush. The same process applies to the stabilizer bar bush on the passenger side. Remove the bracket and the stabilizer bar bush. Clean off any dirt or grime from the bushing mount area. It is important to make sure the mount is clean before installing a new bushing. Alright. We already removed all the parts that we needed to change. Remember that in a car suspension system, parts tend to be replaced in pairs. This is because when any suspension part, such as the lower arm, rack end, tie rod end, or any bushing fails, the other side is likely to follow soon. This means that the left and right parts would need to be replaced at the same time. If you replaced only one side, it would create imbalance. More stress would be exerted on the side that hasn't been replaced, and reduce its life expectancy. Alright, everything is ready. Now it's time to assemble everything. First, we are going to install the stabilizer bar bushing. You can see the difference between these two. The old one has a wider hole. This can cause the stabilizer bar to rattle and make a clunking sound, especially when you drive around corners or over bump. The new one looks nice and should fit snugly without any play or movement. Before you install it, it's a good idea to use rubber grease. This grease compound is designed to preserve rubber and help prevent it from deteriorating and cracking over time. Squeeze some grease inside both bushings. Then press fit it to the stabilizer bar. Put the stabilizer bar clamp over the bushing and tighten the 12mm screw bolt on the clamp. From here on out, it's basically the reversal step of what we did before to remove the component. Use the floor jack to raise the subframe and then secure it with the screw bolt, 17mm. The right side and the left side. Next, we will install the new steering rack bushing. Lift the steering rack and the clamp by hand, then put the new bushing in place. The round one is on the passenger side, and the other one is on the driver's side. Put the steering rack clamp on and fasten it with a 17mm screw bolt. Tighten the screw bolt to 69 Newton meter. Attach the engine mounting bracket and tighten the screw bolt to 69 Newton meter. Next, 4 new bushings will be installed on the cross member. Each bush has 2 parts, an upper and a lower part. And one set of bushes also has a metal cylinder cone in the middle. First, we need to remove the cylinder cone from the old bushing. Then, put the upper part of the bushing on top of the cross member. After that, press the cone into the lower part of the new bushing. Finally, insert the cross member screw bolt into the cone. Do the same step for the screw bolt at the back of the cross member. To install the cross member, I will use a car jack to raise the cross member in place. Secure the cross member in place by placing a screw bolt on the rear engine mounting. Then, hand thread the 2 screw bolts in the front and rear cross members. Install the front engine mounting screw bolt. Then, you can lower and pull out the car jack. Torque both engine mounting screw bolts to 52 Newton meter. Then torque the cross member screw bolt to 69 Newton meter. Next, installing the lower arm. Position the new lower arm in place. To hold the lower arms temporarily in place, put a screw bolt through the pivot holes. Then, install the steering knuckle to the ball joint. You may have to tap the ball joint shaft to align with the steering knuckle. Tap the ball joint using a hammer without taking out the nut to avoid damaging the threads. Once the shaft lines up, remove the nut and insert the ball joint into the steering knuckle. Then place the jack under the knuckle and lift it up until the lower arm rises to where the car normally sits. This prevents the bushings from breaking. As if you tighten them while in the air, it tightens the bushing in that position. And when you lower the vehicle back onto the ground, it causes the bushings to twist and cause them to tear. Now if you tighten the control arm bolts with the lower arm rising to where the car normally sits, it will tighten the bushing in that position and will only twist or bind when going over bumps and such. That's something you want to do anytime you install something with bushings. Put in the support bracket and 2 screw bolts. 17 mm. Hand tighten them. Then, using a wrench, temporarily tighten them. Next, take out the screw bolt and install the screw bolt from the rear front bushing. Hand tightens the nut on. And temporarily tighten the screw bolt. Tighten the subframe screw bolt to 90 Newton meter. Torque the lower arm bracket screw bolt to 90 Newton meter. The front lower arm screw bolt is tightened to 108 Newton meters. Next, we will install the inner tie rod or rack end with a new boot cover, a tie rod end and a CT bush. Put the inner tie rod into the steering rack and tighten the inner tie rod by hand. And once we get it hand tight, grab your inner tie rod tool and put it over the end of the inner tie rod. And attach a long extension to the socket drive. Torque the inner tie rod to 90 Newton meter. Slide the boot in. And then zip tie the end of the boot so it stays in place when you turn the steering wheel. And zip tie another one at the very end of the boot. Let's add our jam nut far enough up the shaft. Then thread our tie rod all the way in with exactly the same number of turns that it took to take it off. Then tighten the jam nut up to the outer tie rod end. Get the tie rod and push into the knuckle hole. And then we can install the castle nut and cotter pin. Torque the bolt to 25 Newton meter. Next, installing the upper strut mounts and coilover suspension. First, you need to loosen the preload spring seat, so that the spring can move freely on the absorber. Use the wrenches provided to change the position of the spring seat. Usually, there are 2 lock rings below the spring. Turn anti-clockwise for both lock rings to lower it down. Remove the top strut mounting bolt. And assemble the new front strut bearing onto the front strut mount to attach them together. Put the strut bearing cap back, and we are ready to install the coilover suspension in the car. Using a scissor jack, jack up the steering knuckle. And remove the wire that holds the knuckle in place. Return the absorber to the vehicle and place the upper end back up into the strut tower. And put on the retaining bolt by hand to hold the strut assembly in place. Lift up the knuckle again to line up the lower strut hold. And reinstall the 2 strut lower mounting bolts. Use 2 wrenches to tighten the bolts, which secure lower end of the shock absorber assembly. Both of them 17 and 19 millimeters. Place the brake line into its mounting. And tap in the clip to keep the brake line in place. Perfect. Torque them to 110 Newton meters. Then, lower your jack and remove it from under the steering knuckle. We need the suspension in full extension or full drop to do a spring preload setting. With the shock at full drop, use your hand to turn the spring seat ring clockwise until the spring touches the top. This is your 0 preload position. From this point, you will add preload to the spring. Now, the thickness of the lock ring wrench is 4 mm, so when you can slip the wrench in between the lock rings, you're good to go. Tighten up the lock ring to lock your preload in place. To adjust the right height, you can turn the shock body clockwise to lower the car or counterclockwise to raise the car. Next, put within the stabilizer link with washer and stabilizer rubber, through the lower arm link. Followed by stabilizer rubber, washer, cylinder collar, a washer and stabilizer rubber. Then insert the stabilizer bar link, stabilizer rubber, washer and the last one with a self-locking nut. Tighten the self-locking nut until you can see the tip of the stabilizer link bolt. Alright. Our suspension is completely installed. We are so close to finishing this front coilover. All we have to do now is check that everything has been done correctly, make sure that all removed parts are installed in the same way as they were before the installation. Also, make sure the brake hose is clipped to the absorber mounting. And remember, when replacing parts of the suspension system like shocks and bushings, it's best to replace them in pairs, either for the front or rear of the car. Also, don't forget that any time a control arm is removed or replaced, an alignment needs to be performed on the vehicle. To finish this up, we're going to put the tire back on, lower the car, and then torque both bolts down to specification. And also do the same on the other side. Okay, let's finish this. Take the tire from under your car, lift the tire, align it with the wheel hub, and slide the tire in, and tightening the 4 lug nuts back onto the wheel. Repeat the process on the driver's side. Raise the vehicle just above the jack stand, and remove the stands. Lower the vehicle to the ground and torque each wheel nut to 111 Newton meters. Lift up the hood and torque the upper strut nut on both sides of the car to 40 Newton meters. And that's it. We have successfully removed the old suspension and bushings and installed a new front coil-over suspension with new bushings. There's one more thing that you need to do. It is highly recommended that you perform a front-end alignment after replacing a suspension part. So let's take a moment to look at all the parts we have replaced. This is a boot cover for the inner tie rod or rack end. If you drive the car with the boot cover like this, the grease will come out and make the joint dirty, quickly contamination. That can cause damage to the inner tie rod. Bushings are made of rubber or polyurethane. They are designed to compress and deflect under load, which helps to absorb shock and reduce vibration. However, over time, the bushings can wear out and need to be replaced. If you notice that some of your bushings are damaged, you should change them as soon as possible. The first symptom you will notice is increased vibrations often felt in the steering wheel. If you drive over uneven terrain such as gravel or a rocky road, then the knocking or clunking sounds that you hear will be amplified. A bushing in good condition would not get loosened or rattle around from driving over this kind of terrain. It's relatively easy and cost-effective to replace these bushings yourself with the right tools and techniques. The lower control arms are part of the car's suspension system. They connect the vehicle's subframe to the steering knuckle assembly. It is often this dust cover that deteriorates due to normal wear and tear. The dust cover doesn't just keep dirt out, it also holds the grease in the ball joint. If the dust cover is damaged, it can cause the ball joint to move excessively, affecting the alignment of the wheels. If there is a lot of play in the ball joint, you should consider replacing the lower arm. Let's take a look at the shock absorber. If you find a layer of oil outside of the shock like this one, it means the oil seal is leaking and the shock needs to be replaced. How do they work? The spring absorbs the shock and compresses, but it will send back the same force once it is uncompressed. This is where dampers or shock absorbers come into play. The shock absorber will prevent the spring from bouncing the car back and forth under load after it absorbs a bump. Shocks can help you maintain better control over your vehicle, resulting in a smoother, more comfortable driving experience. The damaged shock absorber appears like this. See how easy it is for me to push the shock all the way in with just my hand? There's not really much of a resistance to either direction. A good shock absorber should be able to resist a lot of force in both directions. The ride will be rougher as a result of the suspension's inability to absorb shocks. The shock absorber mounting, also called the top strut mount, is the mount that connects the shock absorber to the vehicle's body. The mount also absorbs shocks, vibrations, and noise, preventing them from entering the cabin. And there you go. That is how you rebuild the front-end suspension system in your car in a proper way. Something you can realistically do at home within your budget. So, let's go for a ride. Ultimately, your car's suspension system is a crucial component required to ensure a safe ride whenever you hop in your vehicle. Without suspensions, your car wouldn't be capable of handling a daily drive. Taking care of your car and understanding how it works will help you notice any problems with the suspension early on and prevent further damage. Be nice to your car, and it will be nice to you. I can't believe how good this car drives. It feels like a totally different car. I wish you guys could feel this. It feels like a brand new car. What a difference. As always, I hope the video was helpful. If it was, remember to give it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell for more videos like this, and be sure to check out the links in the description. I put links to all the tools and products I used in the video description, so you could easily find them. Stay tuned.
But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, maybe you'll get sick of being the monster out of my head, under my bed. Think you're something out of my nightmares, standing right there. But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, then will you get bored of killing me?
Silhouettes of you are like a taunt. Never really know just what you want. With you I don't ever feel calm. I can feel the sweat inside my palms. Play with me like cats and a string. You don't understand the